These vehicles are extremely capable of getting the job done that only a gas vehicle could do, as conservatives would want you to believe.
If they were so much better than gas-powered vehicles, why hasn't the economy reflected that?
As many of you know, the Liberal government has banned the sale of new gas-powered vehicles as of 2035. This has led to concerns across the country from your average Canadian, all the way up to the CEOs of automakers. Today, the Conservatives introduced a motion to remove that ban on gas-powered vehicles, not because they're against the environment, but because we live in Canada.
Let's take a look.
Landsman, seconded by Mr. Davies, Niagara South, moves that given that the Liberal government is banning the sale of gas-powered vehicles that will force Canadians to buy electric vehicles, and this mandate will drive up the cost of vehicles by $20,000 in order to allow Canadians the choice to purchase any vehicle that meets their needs at a price they can afford, the House calls on the Liberal government to immediately end their ban on gas-powered vehicles. The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm going to split my time as I rise today in support of the Conservative motion in opposition to the government's authoritarian, misguided, and altogether nonsensical ban on gas-powered vehicles. A ban on gas-powered vehicles sounds like some kind of conspiracy theory or something straight out of a science fiction novel, but it's real stuff, and it's happening right now, and the Minister of Environment told us as much last week. And she didn't tell us that it was some aspiration or some kind of 100-year plan. She told us that it was a hard ban, a concrete requirement that this government's going to bring in less than 10 years from now. So we know that members across the way like to think while wearing their radical thinking caps or their CN Tower climbing jumpsuits. Let's take them off for 1 second and really consider what a policy like this does for Canadians and the Canadian economy. It would mean that we would need to have nearly 700,000 charging ports from coast to coast in less than a decade. We have 60,000 right now. And get this, in 2024, last year, the government managed to install fewer chargers than it did the year before. And apparently the only thing moving slower than those electric vehicle charging construction of those stations is the government email mandating them. This ban would also mean that $600 billion would have to be prepared in infrastructure, would have to be spent. That's over $11,000 for every single car on the road at the moment. And it would mean even lower car sales, lost jobs, higher auto prices, and the misery for consumers and workers alike. And that's not according to me, that's according to the CEOs of some of the largest automakers in Canada. Canadian economists and the nonpartisan number crunchers say that this ban would cost us 38,000 jobs if the sector remains operational at all. The boots on the ground, the people who make the cars, purchase the parts, navigate the international trading relationship, say a move like this would take us out of alignment with key trading partners like the U.S. In an integrated North American market, threatening our position in the supply chain and the global economy. And let's not forget, the Liberals want to do all of this at a time where our auto sector is already menaced by tariffs south of the border, while we're already losing jobs left, right, and center. The Globe and Mail reported more today. And while Canadians are still reeling from the worst inflation in 4 decades. Add an industrial carbon tax to this, and now you've got a recipe for uncompetitiveness, all while preaching the bravado of an elbows up. And Canadians can't even think about putting food on the table, finding a place to live, or frankly, I think the last thing on their mind is putting a new Tesla in the driveway. But the government's going to come in with another job-killing mandate, another burden on consumers in the economy, all because they know better than you do. I don't think that the Environment Minister has taken any time to think about these mandates in a real way, and I know that her accomplice, the Heritage Minister, who actually brought these mandates into place, hasn't either. This is what you get when you govern by vibes instead of governing by logic and reason. Canadians have certainly got used to this from these Liberals, but even by established standards, this ban deserves some kind of award in creative governance. A deeper dive into the program, Mr. Speaker, and the inconsistencies and lack of oversight, you end up with just plain lunacy. And I think the Canadians watching this at home have no idea that this is happening. And this is a plot twist that nobody saw coming except for every single automaker in the industry. The federal electric vehicle rebate program just ran out of money. 2 months early, poof, gone, vanished, just like that. But the sales mandates, they are still in place. Look, it's like telling Canadians that they have to eat nothing but steak for dinner every night and simultaneously taking away their grocery budget and calling it a climate plan. Automakers, dealers, and consumers were, like, shockingly not thrilled to find out that the $5,000 rebate evaporated all overnight, and some poor souls even went to the dealership expecting that rebate and didn't get it when they were in line to buy their electric cars. And look, I'm not a fan of the rebate to begin with, but nothing says stable investment climate like a last-minute pullback of a rebate that Canadians thought they were getting. And let's not forget the nearly $31 billion in subsidies that were handed out to foreign automakers and battery manufacturers, all whom are already going bust in a really big way, and billions for multinational corporations and their executives, and heaven forbid a consumer gets $5,000 to buy one of these things. So the new economic model that the Liberals always think about is subsidize the company that builds the product and then subsidize the consumer that buys it and hope that nobody notices that the math actually doesn't add up. You can't prop up both ends of the seesaw forever. Eventually, someone is going to want a product and that the government can't give you a check for, and markets won't work on that basis when Ottawa plays both the buyer and the seller in all of this. In Ottawa's mind, the electric vehicle revolution is not happening because they said so. It's incentives, like, that's not their problem. Infrastructure, also somebody else's problem. Communication, that seems optional for them. But the mandates, those are very, very real, and they are sticking to them. The result is that automakers will face penalties for not selling enough electric vehicles, consumers will face higher prices, and dealers will face unsellable inventory. They've told us as much. They've told this government as much. And Ottawa will face absolutely no accountability for any of it.
Okay, so this is the opening speech in the debate on this motion by Melissa Lantsman, and seconded by Fred Davies, amazing new MP down in Niagara South. We had the pleasure of meeting him. So there's a lot to unpack in there, but let's just go over the obvious points. We don't have the charging infrastructure in Canada. You don't need to understand the power grid to understand that. That's the basic premise here. So when you have a plug-in car, by default, you don't get a charger with it. You get your regular outlet charger, and it takes hours and hours and hours to charge that thing.
Yeah, you get a 110 volt plug-in charger that you can plug into any outlet in your home. And with my hybrid, which it has a small battery, it also has a small gas tank. So it's kind of just a little bit of both, right? To charge the smaller battery, it would take me 12 hours.
Right. And that small battery, on a great day, gives you 70 kilometers.
Yeah, in the summer, weather's perfect. I was getting maximum 70 kilometers just on the battery.
In the winter, that drops to around 30-ish. And the colder it goes, the less you have range.
Well, and the more time goes on, the less range you get too, because it's a battery.
So that's just the basics. So the estimate is we need 700,000 chargers across the country, and we only have 60,000. But the issue here is not just that. It's also the fact that Canada is a big country. We have lots of long distances to travel, and that's fine. The issue is that how do you expect Canadians to literally drive hours and hours and hours across this country and you're stopping not to fill up, that will take less than 2 minutes to actually do that, but it may take 15 minutes, 30 minutes, a couple
45,
hours.
Yeah. I think the level 3 chargers can charge like a fully electric car in about 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah, like that's a fully electric car, like a Tesla or something like that. So, you know, they're not wanting to sell hybrids. They're not even doing that. They are saying, no, it has to be fully electric.
Well, and that's because they don't want you driving, right?
Well, there you go.
The government does not want you going on road trips. We heard it from Mark Holland.
You'll set the planet on fire.
Yeah. Like, they do not want you going anywhere.
Well, Mark Holland got what he deserved because he's no longer an MP. So there you go. But the other issue I want to zero in on, because Melissa Lantsman kind of flew by it, was when she said that the automakers are warning the government that they're going to have inventory they can't sell. What does she mean by that? What she means is that there's going to be a massive shift in the auto economy if this comes to pass. This is what will probably happen. So Canadians are going to be forced to buy all of these super expensive EVs. And I say super expensive because the cheapest reasonable one I've seen starts at around $40,000, and that's brand new. And that's with some deals that are going on. But they go up to, 60,000. Actually, sorry, that was a hybrid. My mistake. So you're going to be spending probably 60,000 and up for a new fully electric car. Fine. So fast forward to 2035, the average Canadian cannot afford that because we're still trying to feed ourselves and we're still trying to afford rent and all the rest of that. So guess what they're not going to do when they need a car? They're not going to buy a new one.
Well, and this is the thing. I think after people's homes, cars are the most expensive expense that Canadians have. So if you are saying to Canadians, well, you know that $30,000 or $40,000 gas-powered vehicle that you were going to buy, you can't have that anymore. Now you have to spend at least $60,000 on a fully electric. Right. How is that going to work? So what is that going to do? That is going to move Canadians from a new car market to a used car market. So you are going to see a lot of traffic on these used models. Now the trick is they're not going to be making these gas-powered models at some point in the future because they're going to be transitioning everything to EV, or at least, they're going to be selling only EV in Canada. So what does that mean? Well, that means that parts are going to be more difficult to come by, and it's going to be more expensive to actually repair one of these cars. And it also means, and we saw this a couple of years ago, that the used car market in terms of price is going to go through the roof. So it's also going to be expensive to buy a used car, but it won't be as expensive as buying a EV. Well, and here's another issue with the EVs. You have to plug them in. They're not hybrids. You have to plug them in to get them working. What happens where there's a ice storm, like for example, that was recently in Peterborough, and it knocked out the power in some places for up to a week. Right. You can't go anywhere. You can't even leave to take your family somewhere warm because your car is not functioning because you can't plug it in. Right. You're trapped on the side. You're trapped in your driveway. So what do you do then? Borrow your neighbor's gas-powered car. That's what you do. Or you get a gas-powered generator to generate enough electricity to get the car going, which really defeats the purpose. Right. So, the Liberals are not thinking about how life is practically in Canada. Well, and this is the issue, right? They're not waiting for the infrastructure to be ready in order to do this. They are just saying, nope, we're issuing the ban, so folks, you better get the infrastructure ready because it's coming. And there's no urgency to do this. There is literally none, especially in Canada. Again, great, Canada's net zero. We've eliminated our 1.6%, which by some accounts that's already existing today. But anyway, let's just run with the argument. Great. It's a good thing that India and China don't give a crap about that. Really good thing. It's a good thing that Russia doesn't give a crap about that.
It's a good thing that all these other countries don't give a crap about that. But as long as Canada is poor and environmentally friendly, that's what matters, right? Now, Melissa Lantsman goes on to finish her speech, and then she ends up getting a couple of questions.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to Government House Leader.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. I must say there's a little bit of irony here. For those that are not aware, the member that just spoke actually used to work for Doug Ford when he was, he still is the Premier of the province of Ontario. And, you know, whenever we saw these giant press conferences where you would have Justin Trudeau talking about the importance of expansion, employment opportunities in the whole electric field in terms of vehicle productions and the potential for expansions. Who was beside him? Doug Ford, the Premier of Ontario. And I'm wondering if Doug Ford had any influence on the member opposite, or was Doug Ford wrong in terms of his investments? Because there was provincial investments also tied into those. Was Doug Ford wrong too?
The member for Thornhill.
Thankfully, Doug Ford has had no influence on this member in terms of the decision, the insane decision of mandating electric vehicles for people to drive. $31 billion of government investment is going to vanish in this country. Jobs will vanish in this country. Say that to the 38,000 auto workers that will be out of a job. Say that to the 56,000 auto workers whose job is at risk today. If he wants to make a joke about Doug Ford, that's his prerogative. But this is serious about the people who work in this country and people who get to choose what they drive, how they live their lives, what straw to use, and every decision about their lives. We're not going to take a lesson from this government about how to live our lives.
Well said, Melissa. So, again, the Liberals love playing this guilt by association. It's one of the most terrifying things about the far left ideology, is even just standing next to somebody, you're guilty. You worked for somebody, you're guilty.
You know somebody, they're your friend on Facebook, you're guilty.
Right. But this is what they do. And I love that Melissa just came back and said, well, thankfully Doug Ford has had no influence on me when it comes to this. And, you know, nice that you're trying to make a joke there when 38,000 Canadians are projected to be out of a job when it comes to this.
And our employment rate is already higher than it has been in quite some time.
Well, and you already actually have some of these automakers announcing, you know what, we're done with EVs. We're not doing them. So
there's a lot of problems with them.
There's massive problems with them, and they are just inundated with recalls after recalls after recalls. And that's expensive.
Well, and if something happens to the battery, you may as well replace the whole car because it can be just as expensive as replacing the battery.
Right. Some of those batteries cost between $10,000 and $30,000. That's basically the majority of the price for the car is that battery. So.
And can you recycle the batteries afterwards? I don't even know. Like, what do they do with a lithium-ion battery that's been rejected?
Well, that's the magical question, right? But it doesn't even go into that cost equation because the auto manufacturers, they're not going to be the ones recycling them. So it doesn't even matter. They're still eating that cost, and they're eating the cost of the recalls. They're eating the cost of perpetuating the recalls. They're eating the cost of the lawsuits for all these cars that are setting on fire. It's crazy. Like, say what you want, but it's quite rare that your gas-powered vehicle spontaneously combusts in your driveway by just sitting there. Just saying. Doesn't happen very often.
No, but I literally received a recall for my hybrid that said you are not allowed to plug it in until we have a fix for this recall because it could catch fire.
Right, and that took months.
That took months to fix. We finally got it fixed last week. Now, I'm not knocking electric cars as a whole. I think it's a very individual choice, and you need to give Canadians that choice. For me, who does most of my driving, running errands, picking our son up from school, taking him to and from therapy, it's beneficial for me to have a hybrid because most of my driving is done on battery power. But when we go to visit my parents, when we drive to Ottawa, then we need the gas power.
So there you go. But the last thing that Melissa said was this government wants to control virtually every aspect of your life.
Right.
And we've seen that. And we see that in the policies. They want to make you completely dependent on them by taking all of your choice away from what you can actually do, where you take your kids to daycare, where you go to the dentist, all of this. And they want to make you so reliant on them that you could never, ever vote against them ever again. And they want to control the straws that you drink out of, what cars you buy, and who else knows what's down the pipe.
Well, and the thing is, if you created an alternative to gas-powered vehicles, say electric vehicles, and they were better, more efficient, they were cheaper, Canadians would just buy them.
Right.
But they don't have that solution. So the government has to draw this line in the sand and say, after this date, no more gas-powered vehicles can be sold. They have to force you into this choice because they're not more efficient, because they're not better, because they're not cheaper.
Well, that's the magical point, is if they were so much better than gas-powered vehicles, why hasn't the economy reflected that?
Well, and again, to my earlier point, you will have Canadians that will choose an electric vehicle or a hybrid because for them, for their driving patterns, it is beneficial, it is better. But by and large, you can't just say, hey, everybody, you have to have an electric vehicle because we say so, whether or not it's better for you or your pocketbook.
The Honourable Member for Pierre Boucher, Les Patriotes Verchères. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know if the member is aware, but there is an excellent hub in Quebec about electric transportation. There's an excellent industry. There are a lot of people who are really excited to work for the clean energies of the future. Is my colleague attacking an industry that is strong in Quebec that generates thousands of jobs? Is she trying to go to war against EVs?
Mr. Speaker, nobody is denying that there are times where the choice to drive an electric car, or the people who drive an electric car making that choice, there's anything wrong with that. What is wrong with that is that you're mandating everybody to drive an mandating everybody to drive an electric car rather than a gas-powered car, rather than their choice. The decision has to make economic sense. It has to make sense for the driver, and it has to make sense for the Canadian economy. That's what we're saying here today.
All right, folks. I actually like that the Bloc asked this question. You know, are you demonizing electric vehicles? You know, what do you have to say to all those people? And the answer is no. Contrary to the Liberals, because if the Conservatives were coming out and saying you should not have an electric vehicle and you should ban electric vehicles and you should only have a gas-powered vehicle, they would be as bad as the Liberals, frankly, with that policy.
Yeah, absolutely.
But Melissa Lantsman clarified it and said, that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is that Canadians deserve to have the choice of what they buy. And they deserve to make that decision based on what makes the most economic sense to them. To Tanya's point, if you live in the city and you never ever leave the city, it's going to make sense for you probably to have one of those low mileage electric vehicles because they're a lot cheaper than the full electric ones, and you can make it anywhere you need to in that city, in most cases probably, on one charge. And then you don't need to go to one of these charging stations. You don't need to pay extra there. You can just leave and come back, and you never need a drop of gas. So that may make sense for people.
Yeah, I mean, all summer, pretty much, unless I'm going down to my parents' place, I don't really use gas for my hybrid. I drive almost exclusively on electric, and I can get where I need to go, to the appointments I need to get to, and do all the errands that I need to do on the battery.
But for people that live in towns and small cities, and there's a lot of those people in Canada because of the way Canada just is, that doesn't make sense. And the further north you go, the less sense it does. Because what's the point? What is the point in buying an electric vehicle that they say, well, you can get 600 kilometers on a single charge? But when you're in the middle of a Canadian winter, you're not going to get that. You're going to get between 300 and 400 kilometers on a charge. So what are you buying then? That's not value for money, folks.
Right, and what if you're towing something? What about, I'm just thinking because our, there's a horse farm actually quite close to here, and they trailer the horses in and out. We see them sometimes with them. So in the winter, what are they going to do? If they have to take the horses somewhere else, you're going to carry like a 1,000-pound trailer plus a 1,200-pound animal on the trailer of your truck. Like, that's really going to reduce your mileage there.
Well, because you're basically towing something that weighs as much as your car.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
So this is what Melissa Lantsman is saying. Canadians deserve, and in my opinion, are entitled to be able to make the economic choice that fits where they are and in their situation.
Mr. Speaker, one thing I agree with my colleague is when incentives are on the table, they should be honored, and that's certainly something we agree on. But, Mr. Speaker, I'm going to talk a bit about Norway. Norway, 88.9% of all new vehicle sales are EVs, Mr. Speaker, and they're a cold country. A lot of it's very rural. They're going to be at 100% by the end of this year. So through you, Mr. Speaker, to my colleague, why do Conservatives constantly cite that it's undoable, it's impossible when other countries around the world take action when it comes to protecting the environment and on climate change?
The member for...
Certainly not going to take lessons from that member and his party who supported this government all the way through, only to sit with 7 people in opposition. But here is the point. Mr. Speaker, you cannot force people to do something that is against their economic interest. That's what we'll stand for every day in this House.
Okay. Gord Johns would like to compare Canada and Norway. So let's do that.
Yeah, so I asked ChatGPT what the land area is. In Norway, it's about 385,000 kilometers squared. And in Canada, it's 9.98 million kilometers squared. So you can fit
30 Norways inside of Canada.
Yeah.
So, Norway isn't even the size of Ontario. So let's just put that there and say, well, a lot of it's very rural.
But it's smaller. It's much, much smaller.
If you took Canada and put everybody into Ontario, and then you said you must drive a electric vehicle, you can understand that a bit more, because you're not driving thousands of kilometers. You're not having to drive hundreds of kilometers when you're wanting to reach civilization in some cases. But
right. I mean, if you look at us down here in Hamilton, we can drive west for 2 days before we even leave the province of Ontario.
And when you look at just percentages, right? You can say a similar percentage of people are living in cities versus rural areas than in Canada. Fine. But the fact remains, that's going to be far less people, and I would argue there is far more people in Norway that are living in cities than in rural than in the rural areas. So you're trying to say that there's some sort of equivalency here when there's absolutely not. Like give me a break. Okay, so you go up to the Northwest Territories, Mr. Johns, and you explain to all of the communities up there, hey, all of you have to drive electric vehicles up here because Norway does it. They're going to look at you and kick you in the butt and get you back on the bush plane and send you back out of there. That's what's going to happen. And they're going to say, well, I guess we're not voting NDP anymore. And then, Lori Idlow is going to be really ticked off with you for actually making that visit if you ended up going up to Iqaluit. So,
well, and again, it all comes down to choice. The government seems to think that Canadians are either incapable of or are too stupid to make the choice for themselves as to whether a gas-powered vehicle, a fully electric vehicle, or a hybrid is going to be the best for their particular situation. The government wants to make that choice for you.
Right. Only Uncle Carney knows. Now, let's jump to Mr. Mark Garrison, who makes an absolute fool of himself trying to argue that the F-150 Lightning is the king of EVs.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. No heat, reduction in gas tax revenue, low range, not enough charging stations, red herring after red herring after red herring. That's all that the Conservatives have to offer on this. Somebody accused me of gaslighting a few moments ago in a speech. This is a gaslighting tutorial being put on by the Conservatives right now, trying to make everybody all fearful of an electric vehicle. You know, I want to go to a quote that was from earlier today. This was from the member from Huron, Bruce, who said, quote, "Take, for example, a Ford electric truck. It's great if you're just toting down the road with nothing to pull behind you, but as soon as you have to put a trailer on it with a bit of a load the battery doesn't hold, you need a combustion engine to get the job done." Well, guess what, Madam Speaker? As somebody who owns one of these toting down the road Ford trucks, I've had it for 2 years and 2 weeks. I put 89,000 kilometers on this vehicle, just toting it around. Have I towed anything? I'll get to that. Yes, I've towed a dual axle utility trailer with a Bobcat S150 on the back from one city to another. I've towed dump trailers with it, Madam Speaker. These vehicles are extremely capable of getting the job done that only a gas vehicle could do, as Conservatives would want you to believe. The reality, Madam Speaker, no, it's not an electric Bobcat, but one day it will be an electric Bobcat, despite the fact that Conservatives will do everything possible to try to ever prevent that from happening.
So it's not the Conservatives that are trying to ban electric or hybrid vehicles. It's the Liberals that are trying to ban gas-powered vehicles. The Conservatives are merely trying to continue to let Canadians have the choice.
Well, and I think it's hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. Even the point that Mark Garrettson was trying to make at the end. Well, it's not an electric Bobcat, but it will be in the future. No. Not in the next 50 years will you see industry using electric vehicles like that. Why? Because guess where they typically use those vehicles? Where there's no frickin' infrastructure. They're literally building the infrastructure with these vehicles. So what? You're going to use that Bobcat for how many hours? I don't know. Let's say you use it for 4 hours and then the battery needs charging. What are you going to do then?
Right. I mean, we've seen new subdivisions being put up and they don't even have power lines in the ground yet. And that's why they're using usually propane or diesel to fuel the not only the equipment that they're using, but even some of the tools that they have.
Now, here's the interesting thing. He's talking about the F-150 Lightning, okay? So when it comes to the F-150 Lightning, it does not get very good mileage at all when it's towing. In some controlled tests, the battery efficiency goes down in some cases by 27%, and that was on a good day, up to 70%.
Wow, that's even worse than in the winter.
Right. So you don't mess around when it comes to towing. So when he's saying, the Conservatives are saying, well, you need a combustion engine to get the job done. Yeah, you do, especially if you're towing this thing 200 kilometers, 300 kilometers, because here's the problem, Mark. Canada is not just a flat country. There's many cases where there's lots of hills, or the further west you go, pretty sure I saw some mountains the last time that I was out there. Out east, I'm pretty sure there's some mountains the last time I was out there. So the trouble is the mileage goes down, never mind the load, but when you're towing on grade, it drops dramatically.
Right. I mean, we were just driving around the city of Hamilton the other day, and we had seen a 18-wheeler get stuck trying to come up one of the mountain access roads, is what they call them. It's not really a mountain; it's an escarpment. But we saw a presumably diesel 18-wheeler truck get stuck. So it happens on steep grades. So,
even under load, a combustion F-150, you can go around 500 kilometers towing something, where you're probably looking at 100 to 200 kilometers on a F-150 Lightning. There's no comparison. So again, are we saying don't get an F-150 Lightning? No. But when he's trying to say it's just as capable as a combustion engine, and he's trying to say red herring. I don't think Mark understands what a red herring is. A red herring is essentially a mechanism in an argument that you use to distract somebody from the main argument. These aren't red herrings. They're actually economic, logical points that are rebutting the whole point of putting a ban on gas-powered vehicles in Canada. And they bring up good points. Like, there's no reason to be so ardent and passionate against gas-powered vehicles. There's none.
No, and again, this Liberal government needs to understand different strokes for different folks, right? Some Canadians are going to get an electric vehicle and absolutely love it. And some Canadians want a hybrid, and some Canadians want to stick with a gas-powered vehicle. The Liberal government should not be taking that choice away from Canadians, because the Liberal government does not know your personal situation. They don't know your personal preferences, what you're going to do with that vehicle, what you need it for.
If they really wanted this to change, remember what we were talking about. The market has to drive that change. So they shouldn't be putting a ban on gas-powered vehicles. What they should be mandating is they should be mandating the auto manufacturers to develop an electric vehicle that performs better than the gas-powered alternative. That is how you will get Canadians to say, you know what? Why would I buy a gas-powered vehicle when this electric vehicle is literally performing better in every single category? Then the market will actually correct and the purchasing patterns will change. But until then, it's not going to happen. And all you're going to do is you're going to end up with another carbon tax situation that may end up in your government self-imploding yet again.